Hello and welcome to this episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm going to be speaking with Erin Panzarella. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Erin, she is a trauma-informed spiritual mentor and quantum healer certified in a wide variety of spiritual modalities, such as Reiki, the Akashic Records, neurolinguistic programming, breathwork, Kundalini Somatics, human design, hypnosis, and past life regression. Her unique methodology combines all of her practices as well as her intuition to create a custom experience that facilitates change within her clients' lives. Erin's mentorship programs are designed to bring balance back to the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual body and turn any challenge into an opportunity so they can live a soul-aligned life. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm so happy to be here.
So excited to have you and speak with you. I think that you and I have a lot in common. And as far as our work goes, and I know our listeners are going to gain a lot of information from you and your past history. So why don't we start there with your past history? Erin, what was it that led you to doing this work today?
Yeah, I'll start at the beginning. So I'm adopted, and I found through my healing journey, through all the exploration that core abandonment wound from the moment of my birth really created this idea within me that there was something wrong with me. And as I navigated, so 11 days before my fifth birthday, my dad passed away. So my dad who adopted me, he was my dad. Um, he passed away. So I had this another huge abandonment wounding of grief just being thrown into my life at a very young age. And that pain, that grief led the show for me for so much of my childhood, for my teenage years, my early adulthood. I just was navigating through the lens that I'm a victim. Um, Life is hard, life is bad, and I really couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I thought that life was going to be something that was miserable, and I really operated from that mindset that everything happens to me and I'm going to suffer through life. And at the age of 18, I had an experience at college where I was completely rejected by an entire group of girls my age. And it confirmed this belief that I was broken. It confirmed that I was different. It confirmed that there was something wrong with me. And that sent me into a very deep, dark hole of depression. I started to have horrible anxiety. And it really sent me, I would say, into my first dark night of the soul, where I had an experience that just consumed me with darkness. And one point during that journey, I had the epiphany that I could not go on like that any longer. I realized that I couldn't live like that because I was not going to make it out alive. And my mom, who raised me, my beautiful mother, she was a Reiki master teacher for many years. And she was doing it, when I was a child, preteen, and I was very resistant to it because I thought she was doing something weird. So I had this sort of influence through her, but I was not at all into it. But when I was going through this dark night of the soul, I became really open because I was so desperate to feel better that I was like, you know what? Whatever weird thing you were doing, I am open to it because I need to feel better. So I became open. My mom started to guided me a little bit. She had some teachers that she connected me with. She gave me a numerology report, which I think blew everything open for me because I just recognized everything was connected. And that really was the seed that was planted that has carried me through with this curiosity, this now knowing that everything is deeply connected, that I didn't go through all of this hardship for nothing. And that's really the journey that I'm on now.
Wow, you covered a lot of ground there, Erin. I want to go back and talk about your
Yeah.
abandonment wound because I believe this is a wound that's really prevalent in our society. I had it when I was growing up and have been working on it throughout my entire life. So dive a little bit into that abandonment wound, how it affects you, and what was your healing around that?
Yeah, I can go on. I can talk about this forever. I think so many of us have this core wound. But I tend to believe that abandonment abandonment wound forms when we do not receive what we need in the moment that we need it. And I would say that 99.999% of people have an experience like this where we don't get what we need because we're raised by imperfect humans. I do think that having experiences with different trauma, like I said, my birth, which I recently connected with my birth family. So I found out there was actually a lot of trauma around my birth, where my birth mother almost drowned the day that I was born. So that's kind of what catapulted me into the world. And I was also born very early. So I think that there are certain situations, certain traumas that can increase this feeling of abandonment, but I think that we all have it at some level. And when my dad passed away when I was so young, I also witnessed that no one really knew how to deal with grief. And being so young, I didn't know how to deal with grief either. So I was looking to the adults around me to help me, and they didn't know how to help me. So I really had this idea that no one understands me. No one can support me. And I think that in that belief system, the abandonment wound grows and grows and grows. And personally, what I experienced with the abandonment wound was this cycle, and I call it misguided self-soothing, but many people will say self-sabotage.
Mhm.
So essentially, when we have a really big abandonment wound, we will look for ways to soothe in a way that is not supportive. So I did it through food, I did it through substances, I did it through codependency with other people. I did it in so many different ways, trying to soothe myself of this initial fear that I was going to be left. And I find that all these escapes that we can develop are so connected to that abandonment wound. So, really, what I needed to do in my own healing journey was number one, look at what I was escaping from. And I really was escaping from this idea. I was escaping from my life, obviously, but I was trying to prove my own worthiness and escaping in the areas where I didn't think I was worthy.
Mhm.
So then I would try and soothe myself, like I said, through different things. And I think we all have our own type of soothing mechanisms. And so much of my own healing journey is finding the soothing mechanisms that are healthy for me, that are supportive for me, that are bringing me to the places that I want to be rather than to my detriment. And that was a really big journey for me.
Mm. Wow. What would you say to our listeners who may be thinking, gosh, do I have an abandonment wound, or I do have an abandonment wound? How can I work with that wound to come into a better place, in my life?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question. Um, I think that number one, if you're witnessing that you have this tendency to fear being left, so abandonment, there is this tendency like I'm gonna fear being left. They're gonna leave me, so I need to do everything to cling on. Um, One of the biggest reminders that I had to come back to when this realization I realized was in all of this, I kept abandoning myself. And that is like the number one abandonment. And I think a lot of the times when we have this abandonment wound, we'll go to self-abandonment to try and avoid abandonment from other people.
Mhm.
So I would ask, and I would prompt anyone listening to ask themselves, where am I actually abandoning myself in my life? And that was one of the biggest reframes for me because I thought that I was trying to get all these other people to not leave, but I kept leaving myself. And there's also this like kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in this. And I'm a firm believer that sometimes life sucks. Sometimes we have trauma that happens. And I also know that in my own experience that I created a lot of the issues that I had later on in life because I kept creating the self-fulfilling prophecy. I thought I was going to be abandoned, so I did everything to cling on to everyone, and then they left me because of the way that I was interacting in the relationships. So, in order to really nip that and to come back home, you have to see where am I abandoning myself and take really small steps to infuse love in those places, to recognize that something within me really needs something. I need to nurture something here. And instead of making myself a bad person, instead of fearing that I'm going to be left, which fear is natural, fear is normal. There's nothing wrong with you if you have fears. I like to remind everyone of that. Um, but how can I take one really small step towards loving myself here, towards soothing myself here? Because I think I know the spiritual healing journey, there's so many modalities, there's so many things. It becomes overwhelming. I think I even get overwhelmed, and I've explored so many different places that I think that we overcomplicate things. So I'm like, what's one simple thing that you can do to love yourself today or to move towards loving yourself today? Because I think sometimes people think, I can't love myself. They're in a place of self-hatred, which I've been there. I get it. But where can I move towards love today instead of saying like I'm going to love myself fully in the biggest way possible? That's the goal, and we can achieve that in small parts, but how can we just take one small step right here right now in the direction of soothing ourselves and nourishing ourselves?
I think that's so important to put out, Erin, because it is so important to love ourselves through these experiences, especially when we're functioning through fear. When we're functioning through fear, like you said, we leave ourselves behind. We put ourselves on the shelf. We're only, consumed, I'm going to say, with they're going to leave me. What if I do this? What if I do that? Then you end up not functioning, as your true authentic self. You're doing everything for them. Then you end up in a people pleasing role. And it's just this vicious cycle, kind of the domino effect that sends you into a space of, like you said, like I'm going to say that you're disempowering yourself and you're disregarding yourself completely.
Yeah, completely. And I think that there's something even really important that you just mentioned, even with that people pleasing tendency. Um, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I think many people are. But I remember when I learned that people pleasing is a trauma response. So even if we look at, when we go into fight and flight, which a lot of us know, we also have freeze and fawn. And fawn, I think in its essence, is that people pleaser. And it goes to a really high extreme. But I remember like finding out that me people pleasing wasn't something wrong with me. It was like, this is my body responding because it thinks it's in serious danger.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the biggest pieces of this work and this spiritual healing journey is, connecting my body and soul. And I really had to remind my body that it was safe. And I think a lot of the times when we start to become aware of all of the limiting beliefs that we have, of all of the trauma that we've experienced, one of the biggest things that we can do, and like I said, one small step is like, how can I remind my body that it's actually safe right now? Because that can open up so much and it can help us then start to process and to get to a place where we don't feel like we're in constant danger. Because I know you might agree, but I know most of my life I was in a trauma response. My body was in a trauma response. And it didn't matter what was going on around me. It was automatically, okay, I'm in danger. I'm in danger. And I think at its core too, the abandonment wound is this everyone's gonna leave me and then I'm gonna die. Like that danger, that ultimate danger, that ultimate survival comes through with that abandonment wound. So I think at its core, it's like I am unsafe.
Mhm. Oh, it's so true, Erin, that safety. And we'll do anything to create that safety. Like you
Yeah.
said, you had all of these mechanisms in your life that you functioned out of, and then you realized it. And I think that that also takes me into like attachment styles and how we start interacting with people. You're talking about our nervous system and we're functioning out of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We're not being true to ourselves. We're just doing everything that we can, subconsciously to keep ourselves safe, like you
Yeah,
said.
completely.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would recommend around that nervous system regulation for our listeners, what they can do? Because they say, don't make any decisions when you're triggered. Don't make any decisions when you're angry. But when you're living in trauma response, that's your entire life. So, what can
Yeah.
we do to calm our nervous systems down when we're experiencing, you know, this is saying like, if we have awareness that we're functioning out of that trauma response, what is it that we can do to soothe our nervous system and regulate and bring ourselves down to a grounded, safe space within ourselves, so
Yeah.
then we can be there,
Yeah, and I think that this is such an important question, and it's also very complicated. Like, it's not as simple because, like you're saying, sometimes when most of the time when we're in a trauma response, we do not have the awareness at all. So I think a really key piece of this is how do we create consistency of connecting with our nervous system so that we can do it, create consistency in our life so that when we are triggered, when this trauma response is happening, then we become more aware because we have this consistent practice. So something that I've been doing recently, because I recognized, I don't know if you've been feeling it, but energy has been very heavy for me lately. My body has been responding a lot in ways that are not ideal. And I've been on the spiritual healing journey for 14 years now. So I thought I kind of like been there, done that. And like, I think a lot of the times you're like, oh, I thought I did this already. And then life kind of comes and the collective energy can be really intense. There's a lot of things going on. So recently I had to come back to the basics and be like, how can I create small, consistent practices in the day to support me? Because number one, if I do that, I feel really good that I'm supporting myself, just having this little thing. So I've had to set reminders each day to just connect and deeply breathe. And I have had times in my life where that was just a natural thing. But right now, when things are really heightened, when things are heavy, I really have to create like, okay, so throughout the day, I'm going to set 3 alarms. Like, and no matter what I'm doing, I take 3 minutes to just sit and breathe. So, number one, if I'm in that heightened state when it's happening, I can bring myself out of the sympathetic nervous system back into the parasympathetic, back into that peace mode to calm down the system. And then also it serves as a reminder that, oh, like I have this practice of consistency of connecting with myself. So when I am triggered, when I feel my nervous system getting really ramped up, I have tools in my tool belt to come to. So, like I said, I think that having a practice consistently, even though at times it feels overwhelming, like I'm saying, like 3 times a day, 3 minutes, that is less than 10 minutes a day. And that can be the difference between me having a horrible day and then me having just a triggering moment in the day that I can move on from.
Mm.
And I think that a lot of the times people are resistant to creating consistent practices because they're like, oh, I don't want to be forced to do something. But I recognize this for myself that when I have this consistent practice, it helps me stop being on autopilot in a way that's really detrimental to my system and helps me really become an active participant in my life again. So yes, it's a consistent practice. And I think that at different times we had different capacities. So when you're really at, I'm kind of doing the bare minimum right now. I'm in a, mode where things I'm like on autopilot, come back to a small, consistent practice to really help yourself connect again, to have these moments for yourself again. Anyone can do less than 10 minutes a day. And I'm saying that. And I like, as a blanket statement, I know anyone can do that. And like people think, I don't even have that time. You do. And I think coming back home to the fact that this is such a big priority, I need to prioritize myself is
Mhm.
such a key piece here as well. Because as people pleasers who are recovering, you think that everyone else comes first, but like, no, you have to put yourself first. You know what happens when you don't put yourself first. So it's really about how can I prioritize myself each day in small moments and know that that actually creates such a big lasting impact.
And it's so important. You really do. I know this is just a played out saying, but you really do need to put your mask on first before anybody else. And it's not selfish at all, because
Yeah.
you need to fill your cup in order to fill everyone else's cup, right? And when your cup runneth over, then it trickles down into everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's really important. I agree, Erin, to really take the time to take care of yourself. It's so important, especially right now. It's so hard. It's so hard right now. The energies are so high right now. We have tons of energies coming in. We have a lot going on in our collective. I think extreme self-care is really important right now.
Yeah, I would agree. And I was someone prior to this point, like I said, like the last few months, I think like, yeah, the last few months for me have been really heavy. So I think at different, like I said, at different times, you need different levels of support. And I think especially people who are listening to this podcast, like you are a space holder. You're someone here, like to help to heal the world, to help the collective. You gotta like triple down on your support for yourself. And I think that at times I was really resistant to that fact because I was like, oh, like I should be able to handle everything. I should be good. But I recognize when you're holding space for so many people, when you're holding space just for the collective energy by being aware of the energy and doing what you can to be a positive impact, like you got to up your self-care game. And I know that at times where I really am not prioritizing myself, I suffer and then I can't help anyone. It really is so true. And I did want to add too, I think that a lot of the times people will become resistant and like, okay, well, I don't want to just like set a timer and breathe. That feels so boring. So I'm like, make it fun. Like recently, what I've been doing. So I have been doing my 3 times a day breathing because I know it's so important and so simple, and taking those deep breaths really does have a huge impact. But I've also been like, how can I infuse joy in this? Because number one, like at times when joy is hard to come by, you got to make it yourself. So I'll put on my favorite song and I'm like, how can I dance? Because number one, that is going to help your body. That is going to get your system really into a mode that's going to be magnetic. It's going to help calm down the system. It's going to infuse joy into it. So I'm like, how can you also make it fun? Because I think a lot of the times we will make the spiritual healing or the healing journey so serious because there are a lot of serious things in it. Like you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with hard things, you're dealing with coming to truths about the way that you were raised or the impact that other people had on you that was really, really difficult. So, how can we infuse joy and lightness in it, especially at a time where the collective is heavy? I think it's even more important. And I remember feeling kind of guilty for having moments of joy and light. I was like, no, we have to have that. And we got to make it ourselves if we're not seeing it around us either.
Yes, and spirit wants us to function from joy. It doesn't,
Mm.
they put us on this healing planet, this learning planet, right? And it is a constant healing journey until the day that we die, I believe, because there's so much
Oh,
and
yeah.
we can't heal everything like overnight. It's a process and
Yeah.
it's a spiral, and we always come back to it because it's like a new perspective every couple of years, and definitely every 10 years we get a
Yeah.
new perspective on life. And I think it's finding that resilience. When I'm listening to you and you're speaking to like, how can I be a resilient person in the world? Because life is hard. It has a
Yeah.
lot of hard lessons. How can we come out of that victim mindset and become that resilient person that we need to be in order to maintain that happiness and joy that I know that spirit wants me to have?
Yeah, completely. And I really want to bring up this one point that I thought about before we even started recording. But I recognize, like, even just with this resilience, I think like having radical responsibility for your life is so key. And I think that when we get into the victim mentality, we are taking responsibility for things that were not our responsibility. And I think that a lot of the times, like I experienced on my own healing journey, I had so much shame and guilt and like hard feelings about things that were not my responsibility to feel, but I was taking them on. And now I've realized, how can I take radical responsibility? And I feel like such a big part of that radical responsibility is recognizing what's actually my responsibility.
Yeah. Yes, 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 yes. And I love radical responsibility. I've been living this way for the last 6 years. And I think it is so important to
Mm,
do. Like any situation you can take, okay, what was my role in this? What part did I play? How can I better myself, do my work so I, make better decisions in the future, or make different decisions for myself in the future, or create something different for myself that doesn't look like what I did in the past.
yeah. And really, I think such a big part of that too is like we got to get into the subconscious beliefs that are there. Um, And I think, in the beginning of my own spiritual healing journey, I was like, love and light all the way through. And I didn't want to look at any dark parts. I didn't want to look at anything that was negative. And I was like, if I think something negative, I'm going to attract the negative. And I think that that can be true to an extent. But if you have this subconscious beliefs underneath the surface operating that are negative, no matter what you think consciously, no matter how many affirmations you do, it's not going to shift your reality. And I remember being like in the beginning of it, like thinking all the positive thinking, like redirecting all the thoughts. And I recognized like, oh, something has to, there's another piece to this that I am missing. So then I, went on my whole exploration to see, and I recognized, we really have to get into the subconscious. And we have to get into the deep rooted beliefs. Like we said, even with the abandonment, we have to get into the deep rooted things that happen from those ages of 3 to 8 to make these lasting changes.
Gosh, it's so true because we function from those beliefs, from our subconscious. It's not our
Yeah.
conscious mind that we're making decisions from, it's our subconscious mind that we're making decisions from. And what are the percentages again, Erin? I think you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've heard different percentages. Right now, I've landed on 88 to like 95% of what we think, say, and do. And that's like beyond every time I hear that, it is so mind-blowing. And I think every year, like the research goes up because it's like it's even more than we thought, guys. And I'm like, that's not surprising to me. So I think that even just using these small, consistent practices, another layer to that is the subconscious loves repetition. It loves repetition. So when you start to take these changes and do them consistently using these practices, because it loves repetition, that's going to have an impact. So that's why it's not as simple as like, okay, I'm going to set a timer every single day. There's actually a lasting change that will happen if you show up for yourself every single day, because the subconscious loves that repetition. It loves having this. So I think that even though there were certain things that I was missing with the subconscious, having those consistent practices in place and really making that conscious choice to show up to get into the subconscious is like where that magic happens.
And you really have to be on it because that little inner voice can just go at any moment. And it can be speaking as though we're back in high school. I'm going to be 55 this year, and I was just with a group of women. And when you're in a group, that's really where your work lies. When you're in a relationship, that's where your work lies. You get less work when you're, huddled in your house, by yourself all the time. The work is when we're out, right? And it's so funny to have these things come in over and over and over again. It's like, oh my gosh, I thought that I dealt with that. I thought I was over this, but no, here it is again. And then what can I do? To talk myself through this process of, okay, here I am. I'm in a group of women. I'm experiencing the naysayer in my mind again. Like here it is. What do I do to push myself through this, and get to the other side? And I think just reminding myself, that was then and this is now. This is not true, because some of the things that come in, it's like, that's just not true.
Yeah.
And then the universe would prove it to me later how it wasn't true. I'll give an example, like I wasn't feeling like I was connecting in the morning. And then by afternoon, I'm having all of these examples of connecting. So I think
Mm.
sometimes our minds can almost sabotage us
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
into thinking that we're experiencing something that really isn't true.
Yeah. Completely. I mean, the mind lies all the time. And I think that I don't know if you remember your first moment where like you were in meditation and you recognized that you were separate from the thoughts that were going on. Like you had that moment of realizing you were the observer. And that was like I think that spiritual awakening was probably one of the biggest for me because I had never separated from my thoughts until that moment. And I think that's why practices like meditation can be so monumental as well, because when you have this consistent practice of separating and just being like, okay, let me observe all the stuff going on in the monkey mind right now, that when a thought that you've thought for so many years, like this thought that is not kind, comes in, then you have the ability to be like, actually, that's not even true. Like, I'm observing this and this is not real. And I remember that moment so well. Like, I don't even know, it happened maybe 12 years ago.
Mhm.
And that awakening was just so profound to me. And I was like, oh my God, I understand what they mean when they say you're separate from your thoughts. And when when I start to not have a consistent meditation practice, I start to become very in my mind again,
Mhm.
very identified with the thoughts. So I think that's why, like, I love to share how these small, consistent practices are so important, because I know what it's like to meditate for hundreds of days together. And I know what my mindset is during those points. And then I know what it's like to not meditate for months and months and months. And I can see how different my mind and how different my connection to my mind is with both of those experiences.
I think it's so important too because it allows us to settle and you can see it in your mind. Like one of my practices is as things come through, just swiping to the left. Just continually like, go ahead, swipe to the left, swipe. And then out in the real world, when these thoughts start coming in, it's just like, no, just out. There you go. I see you. Goodbye now. No need to focus on you. And it's a really good training to come into a space of balance within yourself when you are in the experience. So then you're able to pause and kind of look and suss it out really quickly and then move on.
Yeah, and I love this point too, that like I think a lot of the times in my own spiritual practices, especially for the first few years, I thought the spiritual practices was like, okay, me sitting on the meditation mat, like I thought that was it. But to your point and what you've been sharing, it's like, no, it's out in the real world. Like our meditation mat is like prepping us for the real spiritual work out in the world. And I think a lot of the times we'll like, we'll overwhelm ourselves with saying, okay, I gotta do like meditation every single day, breathing every single day. You'll like we'll do a list of everything we have to do in a day to fulfill our spiritual practices. But I'm like, if you just take, these 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day and then go out, live in the real world, and actually that's where the real spiritual practices are coming up, I think you are freaking golden. And I think a lot of the times we will overwhelm ourselves and not give ourselves enough credit for just all the things that we get to navigate as a human. And like you said, like we came here to experience this contrast. We came here to be with everyone else. We came here, we wanted to be part of this collective energy. And I think a lot of the times we will forget that and we want to isolate. I mean, I know I've isolated a lot, and even with the abandonment wounds, I think part of a protection mechanism is like, let me isolate. Let me not go out in the real world so I'm not abandoned. So I think so much of my own work has lied in like, okay, let me get into relationships. Let me have all these interactions. Like abandonment wounding, yes, doing so much practices on the mat and like in the journal are great, but really the real healing is when I'm out in the real world dealing with the people who could abandon me and having those real life experiences and seeing what thoughts come up when I'm with other people. So I love that you brought that through because I think it's really important for people to know.
I think so too, Erin. I think it's also really important for people to know when they're out there, they're doing their spiritual work, they're doing they're doing their work, life is hard, it ramps up.
Yeah.
So it tests you also. It's almost like the more you open the door, the more comes in, the more energy you're dealing with, then the more spiritual practices you need to do to stay on top of it, or changing it from spiritual practice to self-care.
Yeah.
Getting enough sleep and relaxing, journaling, drinking tea instead of coffee, doing your yoga practice, your meditation practice, because it's almost like it kind of piles on more as you go along. So you need to be resourced in order to handle everything that's coming in. Because I
Yeah.
think the more you grow, the bigger your lessons, I'll say.
Oh, oh, for sure. And like, I love that you're bringing this up too, because the word that's been coming up for me really, really big, it actually was coming up for me 2 years ago and I didn't really listen. And now I'm like, oh, damn, like really. But the word nourishment came up so big. And I kept hearing it, 2 years ago, and I heard it last year, and I was like, all right, nourishment, nourishment. And then this year, nourishment like hit me over the head and was like, okay, you're not going to listen. We're going to make you listen. And as you're saying, like, I don't know if you know that quote. I don't really love the words, but like, it's like new level, new devil. So as you rise, the challenges rise with you, but your capacity expands and your capacity needs to expand. And I always laugh when I hear a new level, new devil, because I don't resonate with the word devil, but I like laugh at it because I'm like, it's so true. Like
So
some
true.
like it's like and then you get to see how much your capacity has expanded as well. So even that word resilience that you brought forward, it's like this is teaching you your resilience. This is showing you how freaking strong you are. And you need to expand your capacity when you're having an impact on more people, more energy. You have to keep expanding and you have to be able to be resilient in that energy. And sometimes resilience doesn't feel like the strongest warrior. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, I got out of bed and that's okay. Um, but I really think that this nourishment piece and like I love the word resilience that you brought forward is so key. And as you grow, that resilience grows with you, but the resilience has got to grow by the challenges coming in.
Yes, and you can really see that too, because and you start to see the test for the test.
Mm,
You see the test for what it is,
yeah.
right? And you go within and you do your work and you process, the way that you need to move that energy through. And then it's on to the next thing.
On to the next
It,
thing.
this feels like you get a break for a little while sometimes.
Yeah.
On
I'm
to
like, yeah, where's the break?
yeah,
It's
give me
coming.
sometimes I negotiate that with spirit. I'm like, okay, spirit, it's really been a lot.
Yeah.
How about a
I
break?
know. I know. I was having a conversation with someone very recently, and she's like, the word that spirit keeps sending me is intense. And I'm like, same, like I'm feeling the intensity, but I'm like, can we like get a little breather? Like, where's the breather? And when we don't have the breather from life, that's when we gotta create that breather for ourselves. And it's just, I'm almost at the point of laughing with it. Cause I'm like, this is just, you gotta laugh with it or else you're not gonna make it through.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to have a big ugly cry, and that's
Oh
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Let it out.
Oh, that is so true. Did you have that experience where you did not let yourself cry ever? Because I used to be someone, I did not cry. I was not a crier. I judged people who cried. I remember one of my closest friends, I was on a retreat years ago and I saw her and I was like, this girl's a crier. I can tell. And like 2 minutes later, she cried. And I was so envious because I was like, look at her being open and look at her like releasing and look at her like being seen. And like ever since I think that moment, and she knows this, like I have really been looking to like let myself release in that way. And I remember growing up, my like the word was like, there's no crying in baseball, which I never understood. Obviously it's a movie quote, but I'm like, we're not playing baseball. I don't understand. But it literally was like crying is a bad thing. And having these releases, and I think that this even goes back to just like with nervous system regulation, like they're so freaking necessary.
Hmm.
And now I'm like, I love a big ugly cry. And like sometimes I'll just sit, I'm like waiting for the cry because I'm like, I know it needs to come. I know it needs to happen. Like, please let it happen. So I love that you brought that through too.
And it's so true, Erin. We were trained back in the day to not cry, to not have emotion, to just get over it. I talk about this in my book and on podcasts before about grief, and people just want us to get over it and move on. And no, you cannot do that. You have to grieve and you have to allow yourself to grieve. You have to allow yourself to process. You have to allow yourself to cry. And if you can't get to that crying point, I have put on movies
Mm,
that I know I'm going to cry with,
yeah.
because I know I need to move the energy, dance it out, shake it out, have a temper tantrum, do some emotional release exercises, but we really need to get it out of our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that it's so important for people to know, like sometimes that's the biggest spiritual tool. That's the biggest healing tool. It's not like, it's not doing the meditation. It's not doing that. It's like literally letting yourself feel the emotions that really need to come out,
Yeah.
that really need to be felt. And I was someone who repressed every single emotion, especially with grief, at so young. Like anger was an emotion I did not let myself feel, but it was festering inside me for so long that I like in adulthood had to reconnect with like, okay, like what does it feel like to be angry? And it's okay to be angry and like literally amping myself up with this anger because it was so necessary. And when you let yourself feel it now, you are letting the little you feel it. You're letting the versions of you that didn't feel it feel it. And it's like this quantum experience that I like, it's so powerful.
And it's true. Our littles really have a lot that they need to let go. There's a lot that our littles weren't allowed to express
Yeah.
and release. So to hold them gently and hold their hand and let them know that it's okay too, because we do. We in society function with our little, with our teenager, with our 20 something, and we have to let them talk sometimes. And then there are times it's like, here, have a cone of ice cream. The adult has got this.
Yeah.
You don't get to function in this situation right here. I'll talk to
Yeah.
you later.
Right. Literally. I know. Like, okay. Literally, I know. I literally every single time like I'm in therapy, I am always like I'm crying tears from like 20 something years ago. It's amazing and it's wild. And I'm like, how is there any left? But there's so many feelings and many micro moments that, like I said, we didn't get what we needed in the moment that we needed it, or we didn't think it was safe to feel what we needed to feel in that moment that we needed to feel it. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about this spiritual healing journey is like we're truly giving ourselves what we need.
Mhm.
And it might be that version of us that's literally 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But isn't it so beautiful that we are the ones who gift ourselves that? And we're the only ones who can gift ourselves that.
It's true. It's true. And you do work with mind, body, and soul when it comes to healing. Talk a little bit about combining all of those into our healing practice and why it's so important.
Yeah, I think that it is monumental because I just noticed in my own life that when I get very much okay, so I'll separate it out a little bit. So I'm gonna share just like with the Akashic Records. So the Akashic Records are the book of your soul, the library of your soul. And I love it. It is one of my favorite things to hold space in. It is one of my favorite places to go to receive wisdom that I need to know in the moment. And I'm going to tell you that when I am only in the Akashic Records, when I am just focusing in that plane and focusing on like the soul level, something is missing. If I'm only concerned with what's going on with the soul, I am also a human. We came here to be a human. We came here to have a body. We came here to experience the limitations of the body, which are not limitations as much as we think they are, but we also have limits within the physical body. We need nourishment. We need so many things just being a physical being. And I just know in my own experience and now holding space with clients that when we only focus in one area, we need to bring the other ones into play or else we will be off balance. And this is someone who, just speaking from experience, I was going into the Akashic Records every single day. I was listening to my guides, I was listening to my higher self, I was bringing through all these beautiful messages, and then my body would be neglected. And I'm not saying that they're all separate. I think that they're all, it's you can work with one and work with all, but I do think focus needs to be put on all of them. We need to nurture every single one of them in order to have a holistic, balanced experience. And I'm also going to share, like, quite honestly, balance is very difficult for me. It is difficult for me to be fully in balance. So it's a challenge that I know very well. And I know what happens when I am only focusing in the Akashic Records or only focusing on my meditation mat and not living my real life. Or when I'm not nourishing my body in the way that it needs and I'm letting, like these misguided self-soothing mechanisms come into play and I'm not eating the things that are nourishing for me. I'm not drinking enough water. I'm not doing any of these things, or I'm not moving my body. There's so many pieces at different points of your life that need to come into play for your system to be in balance, for everything to run efficiently and effectively and in a way that is honoring you, in a way that is just expressing your life force energy. And I think that's the big piece. It's like the mind, body, and soul need to be connected because that's when you're really letting your life force energy soar. So I think that it would be short-sighted for me as a space holder. And also I just know in my own life, it's very short-sighted for me to only focus on one area that we need to bring them all in. So I think that that's why also I've just been so curious with all the different modalities. So I'll bring like Kundalini Somatics into it. I'll bring human design, which I think is a very beautiful system that it's getting out of the head and into the body. So we're actually living our day-to-day life and making decisions in a way that's very embodied on this earthly plane. And I'm like, I can't work with someone unless I know what their human design chart looks like. And then I also want to know their astrology and see, of course, because they're connected, but also see like the cosmic relationship and the cosmic beautiful puzzle that's coming together. And I really view everyone as like this beautiful tapestry that comes together. And this tapestry is built of the pieces of our mind, bodies, and souls. So I can't only work with someone from one level. It has to be all of them, because I just know that in my own life, if I only focus on one, I'm doing myself a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important to bring all of them together. And that looks very different for everyone.
I like how you pointed out too that we can stumble into those coping mechanisms also, or those things that we've adopted in our lives where we use things to numb out, like food or avoidance or something like that. And I think it's important to work with the body, mind, and the soul so we can come into that balance and use that in order to see where we might be numbing out.
Yeah. And I think that there's also this really big piece. Like when I talk about the soul part, I'm also talking about like the cosmic connection. And like, I think that it's really mind, body, soul, spirit. And knowing that you're like not doing this alone either. Because I think for so much of my own journey, especially before I started all of this work, like I felt like I was alone in everything. And really coming together with the knowing that, number one, like my angels, like my dads that are guiding me from beyond, they are still here, but also knowing that there's this beautiful cosmic connection that is connecting me to everything and everyone. We need to bring that piece into it as well, because we're not doing this alone. We are all interconnected. And I feel like that roots spirit like is such a root into love and just like that compassion. And I think that the way the world is right now, we really need that reminder that we are all connected, and like connecting with spirit has helped me connect to that knowing that there is this underlying current that binds us all. And it's really beautiful. And this is why we came here with every single person that manifested here on this earth. There's no coincidence for that. There's a reason like you and I are on a podcast episode together right now. And who's ever listening, there's a reason for that. So I think it's just really beautiful to bring in that collective energy as well.
I think so too. And we are threads weaving in with each other, and there's spirit too. Spirit is part of
Yeah.
everybody's thread. And I think remembering that, because when life gets hard, phew, it's so hard sometimes to remember that when we're feeling like nobody's around, or we're not supported, or we're like in the pool of our own despair, to remember that spirit is still there is so important and so hard to do sometimes.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for pointing that out. So everyone who's feeling alone out there, you are not alone. Even if you're feeling like you are, spirit is there with you, and you are supported with a whole team, a whole set, bleachers full of people on the other side trying to support you and what your experience is on this planet.
Completely.
So true. Gosh, Erin, you have really dove and been woken up to dove into and been woken up to the spiritual side of life, since we're on that topic now. And you've begun channeling and, tapping into yourself for that. Can you talk a little bit to our listeners and how we can resource ourselves and our higher self to bring this joy and happiness into our life and realize that we still have spirit with us?
Yeah, I would love to share just like a very short overview of when I first started channeling, because it came, I would say it was like this spontaneous moment that came from all the small steps along the way. So it felt very like big and massive, but also felt very embodied in that moment. And it's one of my favorite stories to tell. But so it was in the midst of our COVID years. So I think that number one, we all channel. So I do want to say that I think everyone has the ability to channel. I think it looks very differently for everyone. And prior to this experience where I got to sort of open up gifts to clairvoyancy, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, so the ability to like see visions, hear things, feel things, know things. Prior to that, I really channeled through writing. So I think a lot of people can open up their channeling gifts through automatic writing, through just like seeing what comes up and just setting a timer and say like, I'm open to receive whatever messages I want to receive. I think a lot of people love to connect with their own channeling gifts. So if you're looking to, definitely recommend with writing, because that was something that was open within me before I even recognized that it was channeling. But during 2020, it was the winter of 2020 into 2021. And that time in my life, I think everyone, I call it a collective dark night of the soul, an unearthing. I think everyone awakened in some way, the entire planet. And I was one of them. I mean, I think I've had many awakenings. I think on the spiritual healing journey, we have many different awakenings along the way, but I definitely know that time was one for everyone. And I think we're still in it right now. The unearthing is still happening.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the collective energy is so big. But during that time, I was working in an office 9 to 5. So I finally got some time back that I wasn't commuting back and forth. So I got to work from home and I got to move my body a lot. So I was practicing yoga very consistently. And every day I said, I'm going to show up to my meditation, whether that's 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, I'm going to show up. And I was doing silent meditation at this point. Prior to that, I was really into guided meditations, but I was just called to let me sit in silence. So during the winter part, so later part of 2020 into 2021, I was meditating every single day, showing up, like I said, small moments. And I was also going outside in nature, which is one of our biggest connectors. And I would walk, rain, shine, snow, whatever it was. And during one of those days, I think I was maybe like, almost 200 days into silent meditation every single day. I was walking in the woods and I heard the words, open your mouth and speak. And this was the first time I had ever heard something in that way. And I started to just speak out messages. And I knew I was channeling. I had heard of channeling. I've been on this journey for quite some time at that point. So it wasn't surprising to me. But I did not call this in. I was not like desperately trying to channel. It just really came through me. And over the next few months, that's when I got guided to the Akashic Records. That's when I first learned what the Akashic Records were. And I also recognized that I was being connected to the group of souls. They call themselves the Guardians of Light. And it's this collective group of souls that is meant to connect light workers in the earthly realm. And they're here to guide light workers. They're guiding them together. And I just heard the name, and then I heard other people who knew who they were, and I was mind blown. And I read a book, and the Guardians of Light are in that, and I could not believe it because I never heard of that before. And I was really awakened to the fact that all of our missions are connected and all our missions are one. And when I started to channel, it really was that moment where I realized I couldn't sleep on my mission anymore. I couldn't play small. I couldn't hide. And at that point, for years, I wanted to open an energy healing business. I wanted to do this. And I learned within the first few days of channeling, I'm going to do an energy healing business and channeling business. No matter what's going to happen, I'm doing it. So I opened that up. So I got my paperwork back February 22nd, 222 in 2021. My business was officially started. And the messages that were coming through was like, you cannot sleep on your mission. You cannot sleep on your gifts. And I think I was gifted the ability to see other people's gifts and to help them awaken and to help them know that they have a deep gift within them. And like I said, I know that everyone is a channeler in some capacity. It may not look like the clairvoyance or clairsentience or whatever it is, but you have the ability to channel messages that are bigger than you. And I think that when you really recognize that fact, what we were talking about before, you know that you're not alone. You're not doing this alone. You were connected to this beautiful, like interwoven web. And I know that anyone listening to this is here to be a big contributor in building the new paradigm, building the new world that is here, that is one that's rooted in love and rooted in connection and rooted back into the knowing that we're all worthy and we all have a purpose here. and we can't keep operating in the way that the world is. Like, the system is broken, and we're here to really help create a new system. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that we can sleep on this mission anymore. So when I started to open up to this channeling, it really was opening up to the knowing that, like, what I'm here to do is really big. And it's also what other people that I know are here to do is really big. And it doesn't make me better. It doesn't make them, there's no hierarchy here. We all have really big missions. And I just know that, like, there's so many light workers, there's so many people that are doubting, there's so many people that went through so much trauma that are doubting their purpose and doubting their gifts. And I'm like, here to remind you, like, honey, please don't doubt. Like, actually, you can doubt for a second, but move anyway. We can't let the fear stop us anymore. Feel the fear, do it anyway. Feel the fear, is stumble forward, fail forward, like, show up messy. Like, we're all freaking winging it. Like, one of my favorite things is, like, we're all winging it because we have wings.
Oh, I love that. And fail forward. I love that.
Yeah, let's go. And, like, I think that so many people are so afraid of failing. And I'm like, that failing's great. It means you're trying something. It means you're actually doing something. Like, keep showing up. And I think a lot of the time we're afraid, and it makes sense. And there's so many things that taught us that we are not worthy of this. And the other day I had this message come through, and I was like, the question isn't even if I'm worthy anymore. That's irrelevant. I'm like, is the life that I'm living worthy of me? Do I look at my life and feel like I'm fulfilled by it? And I want everyone to feel that feeling, like, I love my life. I love the way that I move through the world. Yeah, sometimes I have doubt, but that's not the thing that's defining my life. So I feel like when you open up these channeling gifts, you open up to this knowing, this truth that there's something really big happening here, and you're a part of it.
Oh, so much yes, Erin. So much yes to everything that you just shared with us. Thank you so much. It was beautiful and brilliantly shared. We all needed to hear that. Thank you so much for channeling that through.
Yeah, thank
Really,
you
thank you.
for letting me and for holding the space for me too.
And this has been such a fantastic conversation, Erin. And to follow up what you just beautifully said, is there a jewel that you would like to, jewel of wisdom that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Okay, I'm gonna share, like, this is maybe like just like a slap forward, like, let's go. I know that there are so many people listening that have had the messages for a very long time. I know that there are people listening that have felt the channelings come forward, that have felt this big energy come forward, and they have not listened. They have not taken the steps. And I know you're tired. I know the energy is heavy. I know that it feels like it's safer to wait. But you taking action now is the safest thing you can do. You honoring yourself and your soul's path and just the mission that you came here with. And I'm going to say 99.999% of the people listening, they already know part of it. You don't have to know the whole thing. Like, I think a lot of times we get obsessed with knowing the whole picture, what it's all going to look like. And I'm going to say, you're never going to know the whole picture. Stop waiting to know the whole picture. Just take that one step forward and just keep doing that again and again and again and again. The picture is going to unfold. And now it's time for you to really lean into the fact that you have the capacity and do what you can with what you have and keep moving forward. Because something big is happening, and I know you're a part of it.
Yes. So much yes, Erin. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you. How can people reach you? How can people find you if they are curious about learning more about you and would like to work with you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm very active. I post a lot of funny videos there, and funny videos and truth bombs. That's at Erin Panzarella. So my name, on Facebook, you can find me, Erin Panzarella. I also have a free Facebook group. It's called Spiritually Embodied Lightworkers. That I do free Akashic Records readings. I do a lot of free resources in there. And then my website, erinpanzarella.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. It's been a
Thanks so
pleasure
much.
to host you. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining me. Again, I'm Liz Peterson and this is Raise the Vibe with Liz. And you can find me at Raise the Vibe with Liz on all social media platforms and also raisethevibewithliz.com. And definitely check out Erin and all the content that she has to offer. Thanks everybody. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Have a great day. Bye now.